You know, we all have a story written inside of us, literally, in our DNA. And today we're going to see how that one genetic code can do two incredible things. First, it can solve some of the most heartbreaking mysteries imaginable, but it can also help us rewrite the epic story of human history itself. Pretty amazing, right? So let's get into it.
I want you to just picture it for a second. The aftermath of a huge disaster. The first responders, the rescuers, they've done their work. And now, what's left is just this overwhelming chaos. And with that chaos comes this massive, heartbreaking mystery. Because for every person who's lost, there's a family just desperate for answers. You see, giving a name back to the nameless, that's not just some technical checklist. It is a fundamental, deeply human need.
Yeah, and this quote from the ICRC really just nails it. It says, "The proper recovery and identification is a fundamental part of the healing process." And that's exactly it, right? We're not just talking about closing a case file here. This is about starting the healing. It's about dignity, it's about closure, it's about letting a family and sometimes, an entire community finally begin to grieve. But how on earth do you even do that? How is that possible when you're facing that much tragedy?
Well, believe it or not, there's actually a system for this, a really organized international playbook called Disaster Victim Identification, or DVI for short. And its whole purpose is to bring order to that chaos, to bring scientific certainty into situations that seem, completely unimaginable.
So it really all comes down to three main stages. First, you've got what's called antemortem data. Antemortem is just Latin for before death. So this is where investigators are gathering everything they can about the missing people, things like dental records, fingerprints, medical info, even DNA from their family members. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is the postmortem data, which means after death. This is all the information they can get from the remains they find. And then you have the most critical step of all, reconciliation. This is the painstaking job of matching the before data with the after data, looking for that one perfect match.
And let me tell you, this is a huge operation. It's not just a couple of people. You have these highly specialized teams working together. So you've got the missing persons branch. Their entire job is that before data, talking with families, getting those records. Then you've got the mortuary branch. They're handling the after data, the very careful, respectful recovery and examination. And then acting as the nerve center for the whole thing, you have the identification center. They're the ones who bring it all together to find those definitive matches.
Okay, so that's the playbook, the process. But now let's get into the really cool part, the science. How do these teams actually make the match? How do they go from a possible clue to just undeniable scientific proof?
Think about it. For a long, long time, identifications often relied on, traditional clues. Visual ID, or maybe finding personal belongings like a wallet or a piece of jewelry. But here's the problem. That's all circumstantial evidence. It's not proof. It can be wrong. And in these situations, you can't afford to be wrong. The real goal, the only goal, is to get to that scientific proof, the hard evidence like dental records or fingerprints that gives you a positive, undeniable identification.
But what happens when all of that fails? What if there are no dental records, no clear fingerprints? What do you do then? Well, that's where the modern gold standard comes in. And it is an absolute game changer. DNA analysis. It has totally revolutionized the field, giving us answers in cases that, honestly, would have been completely unsolvable just a generation ago. So how does this magic actually work? Well, scientists aren't reading your entire genetic code, all 3 billion letters of it. That would take forever. Instead, they zoom in on very specific spots called short tandem repeats, or STRs. The best way to think about them is like little stutters in your DNA, and the number of times the code stutters in these specific spots is different for almost everyone. It's a pattern you inherit directly from your parents.
And here's the genius of it. By looking at just 15 or so of these stutter locations, scientists can create something that is, for all intents and purposes, a unique genetic barcode. It's like a UPC code for a person. So, if the barcode they get from the remains matches the barcode they build from family DNA, boom, you have a definitive 100% scientific identification. It's incredible.
All right, so we've seen how this incredible science can bring closure in the here and now. But, and this is where it gets really mind-blowing, this exact same technology, this same genetic barcode idea, can be used to answer questions on a totally different scale, a much, much bigger scale.
So what if the missing person we're looking for didn't live last year, but 500 years ago? See, the question completely changes. It's no longer just, who was this one individual? It becomes, who were these people? What can their DNA tell us about the history of an entire population? A story written over hundreds, even thousands of years.
And that right there is the big pivot of our story today. The same science that brings closure to a single family can also uncover the lost history of an entire people. I mean, these tools that were built for modern forensics, they've turned out to be one of the most powerful ways we have to understand migrations, ancient history, all the parts of the human story that were never written down. Let's look at a really fascinating example of this.
We're going to turn our focus to Mexico, a place with such a rich, complex, and layered history, because recent genetic studies of the people living there today have uncovered this absolutely profound story about where they came from, and it's a story told in two very different parts of our DNA.
Okay, so first up, let's look at the maternal line, the mother side of family. Scientists can trace this using something called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, because it's passed down pretty much unchanged from a mother to her children. And when they looked at the mtDNA of the modern Mexican population, wow, the results were just staggering. Get this, nearly 90% of the maternal family lines trace directly back to Indigenous American women.
So what does that mean? It means the maternal bedrock of the country, that unbroken line of mothers going back centuries, is overwhelmingly indigenous. It's rooted in the women who were there long before the Spanish arrived. Okay, so hold on to that thought. That's the first half of the story.
But now, watch what happens when we look at the other side of the story, the paternal line. For this, scientists use the Y chromosome, which only gets passed down from father to son. And the picture, it flips completely. Suddenly, the dominant ancestry is European, coming in at around 65%. The Indigenous American paternal lines drop to just 30%. So, you see the puzzle, right? Overwhelmingly Indigenous mothers, but predominantly European fathers. How does that happen? What the DNA is showing us, without us ever having to open a history book, is a clear historical event. Geneticists call it sex-biased admixture, which is a scientific way of saying that after the Spanish conquest, it was overwhelmingly European men having children with Indigenous women. And that specific dynamic is the genetic foundation of Mexico's modern mestizo population. It's a massive part of the country's history, told not with words, but written right there in the DNA.
So let's just step back for a second. We've talked about two totally different things, right? On one hand, you have the deeply personal, tragic story of identifying one person. And on the other, you have this sweeping, centuries-long story of a whole nation. But the amazing thing is, they are both unlocked by the exact same code. I mean, just look at this. A tiny fragment of bone. To a forensic scientist, this could be everything. It could be the key to giving a family back their loved one's name. But to a historian or a geneticist, that exact same piece of bone could hold a clue that traces a human migration from 10,000 years ago. It's one code telling so many different stories.
And really, that's the big idea here. The very same code that makes each of us a unique individual is also the thread that connects us all, to our immediate families, to our distant ancestors, and to the entire incredible, sprawling story of being human. Our identity, it seems, isn't just one thing. It's layered. It's about who we are right now, but it's also about everyone who came before us, all the way back. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What stories are written in your DNA?